first recognize and thank them, Councilwoman Wilhauer, Councilman Spadola, Councilwoman Oliver, and Councilwoman McCoy for your help as we've kind of worked through this process. I'm going to say at the outset that this information that we're going to be presenting is complicated. It's particularly complicated if you don't spend a lot of time, being exposed to it or thinking about it. As for me, I used to be the Secretary of Finance way back when, and so understanding how property assessments and taxation worked was an important part of my job. And in fact, during a period when I was Secretary of Finance, we had an opportunity to pass legislation that would have required a statewide reassessment way back before 2000. We got support at the time from Newcastle County, Kent County, and Sussex County. I got it approved in the House of Representatives and the General Assembly, and it failed in the Senate, as many things often do. And I think the bottom line reason that it failed in the Senate that many years ago was, even then, it was a long time before the last assessment was done in Newcastle County, which, as we all know, is 1983. Sussex County was further back than that in 1975. And Kent County was more up to date in the late 1980s. But the proposition has always been that when you do reassessment, a third of the people's assessments go up, a third stay the same, and a third go down. Now, whether that's the way it actually worked out, it's certainly not our experience here in the city, and we'll get into that. But the difficulty for a member of the General Assembly was they didn't know what third their district was in. Was it in the third where it was going to go up, where it was going to stay the same, or where it was going to go down? And the principle was that, except for some allowances in the state statute at the time, you could only, when you push your assessed values up, the rates had to go down. It's called the rollback rate, such that the revenue that was, net revenue that was generated was the same as the year before. Now, they did give some allowances to the districts and allowances to the county to pay for the reassessment. But one of the driving forces behind this, for as long as I've been paying attention to it, is school funding. The advocates wanted more funding for schools, so teachers had more resources, the schools had more resources to lift up their students, and they thought by having a reassessment, you could generate more revenue. It's a bit of a fallacy because of the requirement for the rollback rate. And if you think about the current environment that we're in after this whole new reassessment is being done, all the pushback, I think, has kind of forced limited ability of the districts to raise additional revenue. Again, when I was governor, we were sued by advocates, we the state, and I as governor were sued to require a number of things for education, and particularly education for disadvantaged children. And part of that was to do a statewide reassessment with the expectations that additional revenue would accrue to the school districts. So it's been a long time coming, I think it's fair to say. And because it's been so long, the values have worked their way so out of connection with current market value or true value, which is the legal standard, that we're experiencing what we have. As that finally a lawsuit was brought by this coalition, which forced the counties to do the reassessment. And this was a necessary step for property tax equity here in Wilmington and across the state. We, the administration, and Rob Winkler's here, Department of Finance, people I don't see, but and OMB, we've been working on the data to figure out, I see Brett Taylor in the back, Director Taylor, thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about these two displays here. This was our effort to understand what was happening in neighborhoods across our city. And if I could explain it, although the detail is hard for you to see from your seat. But the key there shows that the areas that are red are areas where taxes are going to go up significantly. I think it's over 200%. As you got closer to pink, it's going to be less. And then as you moved into blue and green, that the assessments march along with the overall city average, which is about 4 times, a little less than 4 times. So if your assessment goes up more than 4 times, you're going to see, even with the rollback rate, an increase in taxes. Because of that, and because we saw significant disparities, particularly in lower income areas of our city, the east side, lower Hilltop, upper Hilltop, and other areas, and you can see those. I'm going to come away from the microphone to point them out. Here's the north end. This is the area where I live in, east of Market Street, Banner Boulevard. And the west side, you can see in terms of the Hilltop area, and the bluer areas are frankly out in more affluent communities. And so this data, and we basically, these colors represent what the actual tax would be if we had not done what we worked with City Council to do, which is 2 things. One is bifurcate the rate. Historically, the rate for commercial properties and residential properties have been the same. Many believe there's a constitutional requirement for them to be the same. We're going to find out the answer to that question because a suit has been filed to challenge what the city did, what the county did, and ultimately what the legislature enabled the districts to do. But what it did for us, and the reason we used it on a temporary basis, was to buffer the impact in some of those red areas in the short term, right? The other thing that was happening is commercial reassessments were going down. And so to make up for those differences and the pressure it was putting on those lower income neighborhoods was to bifurcate the rate and raise the rate at a higher level for commercial properties and a lower level for residential properties. All right? Does that mean that some homeowners, property owners are going to see their property tax rates go up? Remember, for net neutral, no new property tax revenue, we made a decision early on to establish a budget, in part because of this, that didn't ask taxpayers to pay any more than we raised last year. With the reassessment, though, it means that some taxpayers are going to pay more and some will pay, probably not many residentials paying less because of the shift from commercial to residential, which is a big issue and one that Councilwoman Wilhauer and us have been working on carefully. So the purpose in all this is really pretty simple, although complicated as to how you get there. And that is to soften the effect on residential property owners, right? And to make sure that everybody's paying their fair share in the city, whether you're a residential property owner or a commercial property owner. One of the really big challenges, and so we did these things in the budget. We bifurcated the rates, and we increased, was Councilwoman McCoy, we increased the taxpayer assistance programs, not to the extent that you would have liked, and we understood that, but we appreciate the steps that we were able to take, again, to soften the blow on the lower income residents of our city. Something else that I'd like to underscore is that for going back to when I was Secretary of Finance, the state passed a senior school property tax rebate program that gave senior citizens, regardless of income, over 65 years of age, a 50% reduction in their school property tax. That's the larger number, up to $500. And at the time, that was 1998 or 9, legislation supported by then Senator Harris McDowell, $500 gave 90% of school property taxpayers the full 50%. Now we're kind of way beyond that. But $500 is not a small amount in terms of the school property tax bill that you would get. And so we need to do more, and we will. And I want to thank our folks from Constituent Services for being here, because you get a lot of these calls. And I can't imagine how complicated it must be to explain to ordinary folk what's going on here. As I said, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, so it's kind of comes second nature. And so we have a lot of work to do as we move to the next step. What I just mentioned that we did in this current budget is two short-term solutions. What we need to do in the long term is make sure that people who are living in these red areas in the district and across the city are not paying more than they should, that the assessed value is more aligned with the true value, which is the legal standard, closely determined by market value. What are the sales happening in that neighborhood? And that's where we think a big part of the problem is, and where it's particularly acute in some of these lower income neighborhoods. Why? Two reasons. One, Tyler's methodology did not include interior inspections, just exterior. Two, the sales data that's available in those communities tend to only be the houses that have been updated and where there's been a lot of investment, and not the ones where there hasn't been a lot of investment. And so they have that market data, which drives up the value for the whole neighborhood. To fix the problem in the long term, we want to, and by the way, County Executive Marcus Henry and his people have been extremely helpful within the limits of their kind of knowledge and responsibility. It was their contractor, Tyler Technologies, who did this work. And by the way, Tyler did the work in Kent County and Sussex County as well, and they do it across the country, so that we can, instead of, there is a process for kind of sorting out whether your assessed value is right. It's an appeals process, but it's one by one by one, and it takes forever. They have a huge backup right now. And so our approach, and what we've asked the county to do, is we'll provide some interior inspections. We'll do more appraisals of properties to provide you with information to make, instead of an appeal from one individual homeowners, we'll try to make, have a reduction for the whole block or the whole neighborhood. And one of the differences, if you think about differences of neighborhoods here in this city, if you take that neighborhood beyond certain boundaries, you're going to be affected by property values that are way higher than your part of that community. It's not as much the case in suburban areas of Newcastle County. Just think about neighborhoods that you know. You have a neighborhood that's out here, like where I grew up in Claymont. I can tell you, this neighbor, Radnor Woods, they're all the same. Ashburn Hills, they're all the same. Over here off Philadelphia Pike, they're all the same. In the city, in an urban area, you can be where I live, and then those big houses on Boehner Boulevard. A big difference between those houses. Mine's a duplex, and they're big houses with lots of, that's anecdotal for sure, but it gives you an idea. Just think of the neighborhoods that are implicated here and on the west side, in the Hilltop, Lower Hilltop, and Upper Hilltop. So we're going to seek a $500,000 budget amendment to engage assistance from a contractor that will do two things. Will help us first of all, develop an approach, a methodology to provide information to the county so that they can do it. County executive says, we can do it if you provide legally appropriate and statistically appropriate information. and that there's no legal problems on their end. So we're going to put an RFP out to get somebody to consult to figure out how do we do that. Part of that, or with somebody else, we need to sort out the commercial, what's happening in commercial properties in their city. Because big commercial apartment buildings and residences, they're in the same category, but they're very different than other big commercial properties. And some of those commercial properties are unique all by themselves, right? And so what are the comps that they're using? And when you see a 30% reduction, we know that there are certain things happening in office buildings where they're being converted into residences. What effect has that had? And how is it driving the commercial valuations down? Because when it's a zero-sum game, commercial rates or values go down, the only way to generate the same amount of revenue is what? Residential rates have to go up. So our goal is to make sure there's fairness and equity across classes of property and among homeowners and among the various neighborhoods in our city. And so we hope to continue to work with members of council. I know that you tell me all the time that, and we've been through and walked through your neighborhoods about issues that you have and people who call you up and are concerned about the valuation that they're working on. And you all rightly have your own ideas about how we should approach it going forward. There's not enough time here during this conversation to go through some of the ideas that we have decided not to use, but really just to highlight, first of all, how we got here. You can't see these numbers, I know that, but this is a measure of what's called the coefficient of dispersion. And simply that's the dispersion, the difference from the median value in a neighborhood. Median is half or above and half or below, not average, it's median. And this coefficient, so it measures the consistency around those determinations. And the consistent, sector number 3 is the city of Wilmington. And you can see that our coefficient of dispersion is outside the acceptable standard for this kind of activity. You don't have to ask me, it says it right here, and we have the quote from Tyler Technologies about that. So our thing is, okay, we've got to fix that. We've got to pull it within the confines of the acceptable standards for neighborhoods. And we, as I mentioned a minute ago, we have some idea of why that is occurring. 1, no interior inspections. 2, market data, sales data that's driven by the nicest house in the neighborhood, the house that's just been improved, the house where they've just done work on it. We believe that we can also provide some information on building permits that were secured to put on a new deck, this, that, the other thing. But the key is to what about those properties? Like one of the biggest challenges that we have in the city, and you all show me when I walk in your neighborhoods, are vacant houses. Well, how does that factor in? There's no sales data on those. I guess there's some, but so that's long and short of what we're going to do. So just recently in the budget that was passed by council, 1, bifurcating the rates, limited the effect on property tax owners. 2 was to improve and increase the taxpayer assistance program. And when we think about that, you have to think about a bigger program which is available to more people, and that's this state senior school property tax rebate program, 50% up to $500. And it is not an income test. So anybody who is 65 and older can get that rebate, and it's a significant one. And then moving forward, we're going to need support from council for a council member for $500,000 to engage expertise. I didn't recognize Councilman Hackett. Wait a minute. Where is he? He had another meeting. I'm going to have to apologize on my knees, I think, the next time I see him for not recognizing him while he was here, because he was here right from the beginning. And I actually reminded him that if you want to get recognized, you got to be here at the beginning. So my bad. Finally, I just want to thank members of City Council for your engagement. I know many of you worked, Kristen, you in particular have worked really hard, crunching the numbers, going through your neighborhood. How does this affect different parts of your city? I know Councilwoman McCoy has worked hard on the assistance program, as Councilwoman Oliver and others have. Councilwoman Harley, I know, is also, as the chair of the Finance Committee, is part of that. Let me just close by thanking those of you who do the constituent service work. Could you stand up, because you have the hardest job of all of us. Because you're going to get the calls, and one of the things that we're going to try to do with this consultant, and we'll need your help, we want to get interior inspections. A lot of people are hesitant to allow somebody to come into their house. We're not going to cite any code violations in the process of doing that, so we need to get that information out there. But we need that data to get better values in neighborhoods that are now, we think, assessed too high. The ultimate goal is to make sure everybody pays their fair share, and that we do it in such a way that there's a transition from something, these values have been on the rolls since 1983. Think about some of my staff weren't even born in 1983. I was pretty old in 1983, but that's a long time ago. And a lot has happened. A lot has happened in our city, particularly in commercial areas and in residential areas, for that matter, in terms of some neighborhoods have improved, others have stayed the same, and again, others have not. So again, thank you for being here. We look forward to working with all of you. And now I'll take any questions that you have. We're going to do media first. Are you a media person? Or? I said I'm going to go to media first, and then we'll, with respect. Yes?
So is this for the appeals period for next year? Because
the deadline passed, so we're going to try to get, I think maybe you didn't catch that, but if we have to go one residence at a time, it's going to take forever. So we're going to try to see if we can get neighborhood changes through an appeals process that we would initiate. All right, that's kind of new. We would have to provide the data. We would have to provide a methodology that's acceptable. We'd have to work with the county, and the county would have to work for us. And remember, at this point, since the rates have been set, even though they've been kind of put off a little bit, the rates have been bifurcated kind of in each of the different areas. How the lawsuit will affect that, I don't know. But it's, at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game. If you push assessed values over here to get the same amount of revenue, somebody's value has to go up. And that's a political problem. Yes, sir?
Are you bifurcated rate for the next year?
Yeah, our plan was not to. We'll see, if we can do this work and get and fix the underlying assessed value problem, then we'll try to do that. If we can't, then we'll have to find an approach that suits, and obviously we'll be working with council to do that.
do you think that the bifurcated rates are constitutional?
I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to speculate. Rose gives me a hard time all the time for speculating on legal matters. Yes, ma'am.
This plan that the city now has, is there a timeline in terms of when you'd like to see?
Yeah, I think as soon as possible. You've been hearing references to the cycles, like we'll be moving quickly into a budget cycle, and where we'll be setting the budget in terms of what the demands are in all the different agencies, and therefore what the rate we would need to generate revenue. What about wage tax revenue? Is it growing? Where's the new? We've had some good fortune lately in terms of people deciding to move into Wilmington. We'll have more to say about that in weeks ahead, but that'll all be balanced out with this really difficult matter because it creates the idea that somehow it's not fair. And when people think that the taxes they pay are not fair, it's a problem. It's a problem for those of us who work for those individuals, those taxpayers. And so the goal is to make sure that we have a system that's fair and that reflects the city. The city's way different than suburban Newcastle County, rural Kent County, rural Sussex County, beach properties at Sussex County. And that's why we think that we have unique challenges, and that's why we're proposing to do these things and help the county have the information that they can use to make appropriate judgments on each property. And we think you can see it. I mean, you can see it neighborhood by neighborhood. And look, one of the first things that I've done as mayor is go around in these neighborhoods with members of council. And they show me what's happening on every street. And a big focus of it are houses that are vacant, houses that are problematic, houses that are falling apart. Well, are those values factoring in to what the value that Tyler gave to a certain other house in that neighborhood? Yes?
Had any conversations with Tyler Technologies about their methodology?
Yeah, we did. They were kind of very cautious, and not borderline defensive, I guess. I can't blame them. We were really just doing it to understand, their approach to that. And one of the really issues with the commercial side of things is that so many of those commercial properties are so different. So what's the comp? What's the sales comp that you're comparing it to? And so there are different methodologies. And part of the reason that my predecessor and the city joined the lawsuit was because they were getting one appeal at a time on the commercial side and losing for whatever reason. I think a lot had to do with conversion of office buildings. I mean, think of buildings that were formerly owned by the DuPont company. There are 5 or 6 of them up there. Now they're owned by one company then. They had office workers. Now, in many cases, they're part residential, part a business, part condo. And I think it's hard for anyone to kind of figure out what's the assessed value. Is it what you could get in the marketplace? Is it what the series of lease payments that you get, the income that you can generate out of that property? Or is it the replacement cost of that building? The courts have said that you could use any one of those measures. Makes it really difficult for us, and difficult in particular to challenge. And the other thing that's really problematic, because we want our residential sector to grow, right? And I hear all the time from members of councils and others that our rents are too high. Well, if you're characterizing some of those buildings on the commercial side and you're raising their taxes, that's not helping. So how much of that goes on is hard to say, but it's something that we really need to look at. And that's part of this plan going forward.
Would you hire Tyler Technologies again if they bid for the contract?
We did. They were not our contractor.
Are
They were. You'd have to ask Marcus Henry.
Do you think the city needs a different approach to reassessment than what's done in the county based on some things you said, like the disease that being like more?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we need more and different information because our residential properties are different. There are very few kind of row houses and kind of row houses in the traditional sense in suburban Newcastle County. So I think you have more homogeneity around development, so-called developments there. You have greater diversity in areas across our city, and particularly diversity in how well they're kept up, and some are beautiful. They got all the bells and whistles, and those are the ones that tend to sell. And I think our theory is they're driving the assessed value for the neighborhood because those are the comps that are being used higher than really what somebody could sell their house for on the marketplace.
What about frequency of reassessment?
I'm tempted to make light of it. After going through this, we want to go through this again in another couple of years. I think the answer to your question is clearly from a consistency point of view and a fairness point of view, that would be better. But it also, to keep them up to date. But there's also a perception, which was I think, a part of the perception of the education advocates in pushing for the reassessment in the first place, that it's automatically going to mean more revenue. No, the rates have to go down. As the values go up, the rates have to go down. And we made the conscious decision. We could have I guess we're not limited, but we could have taken some amount on top of that. But we thought you can't possibly do that in the context of what's happening differentially across the city, where some people are going to get significant tax increases. For us, the good part is our portion of the city portion of your property tax is the smaller amount. The bigger number is your school property taxes. Yes, ma'am.
Just to clarify, the plan for appraisals and inspections is just for residential properties or residential?
It's mostly for residential. We're going to engage a contractor to help us work through the commercial sector, understand what's behind that, and how we should approach those valuations. But it's fundamentally about the residential and getting interior inspections and understanding what improvements have been made through building permits, that type of thing. And in actually doing and paying for appraisals, right? So I think the number is calculated in part by so many appraisals that we'll be doing to get closer to that true value, that market rate. Yes, sir.
A few people from Tyler have told me that interior inspections are not the norm for tax appraisals, and that they're pretty hard to come by nationally. Do you think that the county will actually accept those renewed values that you appraised through the contractor if you do the interior?
Yeah, I think that's a question that has to be answered, frankly. And I think the bigger problem is one that it's a zero-sum proposition. If our values go down, somebody else's have to go up in order to have the same amount of revenue, right? The rates have to go up. So we'll make a strong argument that that's the case. My understanding is when it was done so many years ago that they did interior inspections. We think that the housing stock in the city requires or lends itself to getting to actual true value by doing interior inspections. Will they accept it? Remains to be seen. Because the assessment responsibility is the county's. Now, we could do our own, but that doesn't make a lot of sense because it's very costly and, it's just never been done that way. And you have the school property tax issue that's overlaid, so where that's not a city function. Sir, you've waited patiently.
Thank you. My question really is simple. The county has allowed the county taxes and the school taxes to be paid in November. The city is still required
September.
that this tax be paid by the 30th of this month.
Correct.
So my question was, since everybody is saying that maybe the reassessments are overblown or too high, and then why are we being required to pay taxes on the 30th of September as opposed to paying them in November like the county?
Really good and fair question. Only we made that decision. We extended the previous, deadline.
From the 2nd of September to the 30th.
Essentially, yeah. Is that right, Rob? Yeah. Yeah, so could we extend it further? I don't know the answer to that, but we can take a look at it and see. I know there are cash flow issues, right? There are parts of the year where you don't have money coming in, you still got payroll, you got all kinds of implications of that. I'm not sure how the schools and the county are going to deal with that later date, but something, you're right about the problem, which is, well, what if the assessment's going to be changed? I mean, there's a process for you getting, in the future, for getting credit for that, but that doesn't help you in the short term. But thank you for raising that. That's something we'll have to take a look at. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question about the Eden Park shooting this week, the state in May, Councilwoman Darby asked for funding for an Office of Violence Prevention, and I was told that that's still that hasn't been funding. Can you say why not?
Well, I can tell you that it's a tragic, terrible thing that happened. And it's my responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen again. The sad part is that those type of things seem to happen on too regular a basis. Our number one priority, my number one priority as mayor is to make sure that every resident of this city and people who visit our city and come to work here are safe. And so we'll do everything we can to do that. Personally, I wasn't convinced that that would be the answer as opposed to other alternatives. It's never this and everything else. It's this idea versus another idea or another way to spend the money. And so I would prefer, and if it was maybe designed differently, to have more people engaged kind of in these communities. What I have found is, in my experience, the incidents that we have are different than they've been over the last 20 years, and particularly different than those that led us to create a unit we call group violence intervention, which really focused so much of the violence on groups and gangs battling with each other, killing here, retribution there. And so we've created social workers that actually go out and engage these folks and say, hey, look, this isn't going to lead you anywhere place good. So we'll help you to move in a different direction. So we got to keep evaluating. We will do a press event like this in the coming weeks to explain some of the things that I've learned since coming here. One of which is that we have certain areas, and I see it when I travel around with members of council, what I call hot spots. And council people, they know where the hot spots are. And there's a lot of illegal activity going on, prostitution, drug dealing, that type of thing, which leads to some of these beefs, which leads to somebody who's willing to pick up a firearm and shoot somebody. Hard for me to just understand that mindset, but it's something that we have to deal with.